All right, so what's the hot topic around the football program this summer?
Well, I tell you what, actually, nothing is hotter than recruiting right now.
Yeah.
Alabama is on a roll on recruiting. And honestly, Kalen DeBoer's second year, heading into his second full class of recruiting, I don't see much drop off from Nick Saban based on what we see right now. It's going to be a really big week this week with some of the commitments coming up. And it's going to be, I think, what I said yesterday in one of my articles, it's going to be an epic run over the next week.
You know, the biggest name to come out of the recruiting circles over the last year has been Keelan Russell. What do you know about him, and what can you tell us that maybe we don't know?
Well, I mean, obviously he played in Duncanville, Texas, and that's an elite high school program. They played against top competition, so he's seen a lot of the best in terms of high school, which really prepares him to take that next step. I think when you look at him physically, he's got all the gifts. Some people compare him to Jaden Daniels. He's got a little bit of Bryce Young in him. I just think he's an extraordinarily gifted player, obviously a recruit. And I think when you listen to some of the stuff that's coming out of the building over there, they think he's going to be potentially a real superstar type player.
Now, he's the big name out of the 2025 class. Who are some other names that maybe make a quick impact for Alabama this next year?
Yeah, and I think when you look at it overall, one name is, and it's not just the freshmen, it's the transfer portal guys. Isaiah Horton at wide receiver from Miami. He's going to bring a big presence at 6'4", close to 210 pounds. Latsier Brooks is a real game breaker. He's kind of in the Devontae Smith / Jalen Waddle mold out of New Jersey. Set the high school record up there for touchdowns in a season, a career. Real dynamic player. Derek Meadows is another true freshman wide receiver that I think's got a chance to be really, really good out of Las Vegas. He's about 6'6". In the secondary, there is a guy that you need to remember this name, Dejon Lee out of California. He is right at nearly 6'4" corner. Now, again, he could ultimately end up maybe at safety or whatever, but he's a guy that in the spring showed an extreme amount of promise.
For those people that are getting close to hitting the panic button, 9-5 last year, a little bit of a down year, obviously, for Bama. What would you say to those doubters, particularly about, from a recruiting standpoint, that makes people feel a little bit better about where the program's heading?
Yeah. Well, I think when you look at a transition like that, it was the most significant transition in the history of college football, in my opinion. Number one, you're replacing Nick Saban, who is generally considered the greatest, at least of the modern era, since Coach Bryant. And it's going to be a tough transition. On top of that, Kalen DeBoer had to deal with the transfer portal, NIL, all of these things when he's coming in. He's trying to save his roster. He's trying to close out a recruiting class. He's trying to put his staff together. And when he gets his staff put together, all of a sudden, Ryan Grubb and Huff, the offensive line coach, go to Seattle. So he goes back to square one to kind of get his staff together before spring practice. There's just so many difficult things and issues that arise, in a transition like that. Urban Meyer said a few weeks ago, he said, when you have a transition, if it's a guy on the inside like Ryan Day at Ohio State was, it goes so much better than if you bring in someone else from the outside. You're basically putting yourself a year behind. So I think now as we move forward into year two of Kalen DeBoer, I think we'll start to see more of what to expect from his coaching staff and his tenure here.
What are the qualities about him that impress you?
He's authentic. I think when you listen to him talk, what he says is who he is. I don't think there's anything fake about him, and I think that's really helped him. You talked about recruiting. I think one of the things that's really helped him is just he's genuine, he's authentic, and I think that a lot of the parents, the families kind of see that. He relates extremely well to the players that they have here already. I think they've really bought into who he is and what he wants to do and the culture he's building here.
What do you think is going to be Grubb's impact this year?
Listen, I think the thing with Grubb is just his experience and their experience together, the experience that they had at Washington, the things that they did, the success that they had, and I think Ryan Grubb brings a lot. Now, Nick Sheridan, he was kind of in a difficult situation last year. They didn't really have the personnel that fit what they wanted to do. They had to kind of alter things that they wanted to do. So I think this year they may be closer to that, especially at the quarterback position. So I think this is helpful, obviously, to Ryan Grubb coming in, but I think he'll make a huge impact offensively.
You know, we're in a different climate now with the NIL and transfer portal, and you know, we've kind of rocked on for a few years and really haven't done a whole lot of tweaking to this. Does that need to change?
Tweaking to
The NIL and the transfer portal. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, we've opened Pandora's box, and
Yeah.
we keep talking about making changes, but
Yeah.
nothing really starts to happen. What's your opinion on how we need to maybe tweak that or change that in the future?
You know, with this new plan that they have, the House settlement that has come out, it is supposed to create a lot of change in the way the revenue sharing plan is kind of dispersed to players, to athletes across the board in different sports. It's supposed to equalize things. They all are going to have basically the same amount of money. And then the NIL deals, which is something that was really nothing more than pay for play. That's never what it was intended to be. There were supposed to be legitimate name, image, and likeness opportunities that players had to earn money. And now they've got a clearinghouse that all NIL deals over $600, I think it is, will go through this clearinghouse. And the clearinghouse is going to determine whether these are legitimate opportunities, legitimate pay, or not. And so if they don't clear through the clearinghouse, then those opportunities are null and void. And so we'll see how that goes. Some people are saying, hey, there's going to be challenged in court. There are going to be lawsuits, and there probably will be. But I think at least this is a step in the right direction to getting closer to where you want to be.
Do you think people care as much now about college football? I mean, I'm asking this legitimately. Do you think they care as much now about college football as they did 10 years ago?
Honestly, I've seen a lot of loss of interest. I know
you attribute that to what's going on with NIL transfer portal?
I think that's a lot of it. Yes, I do. I think that's a big part of it. I think, you know, fans have become disenchanted with it to some extent because, and I would say this, maybe more so 40, 45 and up fans. Maybe younger fans, it doesn't really faze them as much. But I think the older fans remember how it was, how it used to be, college football. And look, I know there were always deals under the table. We know that. Everyone knows that. But at the same time, it was considered something that was more pure. You're playing for your program. You're playing for your coach, all of those different things. And now it's just like, or it has been the last few years, it's more about who gives me the best money deal.
Yeah.
And I think that really has turned off a lot of fans.
You know, it's just, for me, it's just a loyalty thing.
Loyalty.
You know, I mean, like, you know, when you think about college basketball, you know, a lot of times you would think about those 4-year seniors, you know, the guys that you know, they go senior night and they've been there for 4 years and they've ingratiated themselves with the fans, and really the same thing applies to college football. And you're just not seeing that as much. I mean, you're seeing guys that are going to 3, 4, or 5 different schools, and it does impact, you know, somebody's, you know, that's your casual fan or even a committed fan. I mean, it's hard to keep up, you know, and that impacts people.
It definitely. I mean, I think I've certainly seen that. Now, with that said, let me say this about Kalen DeBoer and the culture he's kind of building here is he really wants to build a culture that is based on. They recruit high school players that fit what they want to do. I'm not just talking about the system. I'm talking about the culture they want to have here. They don't want someone to come in with the idea of, number one is, I'm going to make big money. And number two is, if things don't work out, I can always jump in the portal. That's what they want to do is they want to recruit. They want to bring guys in. They want to develop those guys, retain them here for the long haul. And really, it's not a program that's going to be built on portal. Yes, they might have to fill in specific needs at times, but they primarily want to bring in the guys that they recruited, that they evaluated, and develop them in this culture.
Mm-hmm. All right, now we've got that out of the way, so let's talk about you. You're originally from Mobile.
Yep.
Moved to Corpus Christi, Texas. What initially got you interested in Alabama football?
Yeah. Well, we moved to Corpus Christi. My dad got transferred in 1966. And so I was almost 6 years old. So we get to Corpus Christi, and, people start from other parts of the country that lived in our neighborhood, and then school as well. They start calling us all these different names because we're from Alabama. I'm like, what's so bad about being from Alabama? So I've got older brothers, and I asked my middle brother, I said, hey, you hear these things they're calling us? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, why are they calling us these names? And he said, they're jealous. And I'm like, well, why are they jealous? And he started telling me about Alabama football. And I was, like I said, I was 5 years old, almost 6. And he said, because we're number one. Yeah. We won the national championship in 64. We won it in 65. And we should have won it this year, but they screwed us out of it.
So you get to Corpus Christi right around 65, 66, yeah. Right around that time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when that all kind of went down and he's starting to tell me about Alabama football, all of a sudden, he's creating this, he planted a seed that creates an identity. And I started becoming obsessed with Alabama football. And he told me, he said, hey, anytime anyone says anything to you about being from Alabama, you just tell them Alabama's number one. And, he's a big brother. You look up to him and all of this. And so I'm thinking, yeah, this is pretty good, right? And so in the neighborhood, what would start happening at school and stuff, that's kind of the attitude I took. But people would always root against Alabama because of me, so to speak. As kids, that mm-hmm. creates a rivalry or whatever. So just the obsession grew from there. Mm-hmm. The obsession grew and went on and on and on through, junior high, high school, all those things. And it became my ambition. My goal was to one day go to school at the University of Alabama.
Alabama, I mean, we've got the Stallions, obviously, but our professional franchises have been just a little bit flaky from time to time. But, I mean, it's one of those things that, you don't have a whole lot sometimes. And a lot of people around here, they grow up and they want something to latch on to, yep. And they want to latch on to a winner. And their identity can kind of get wrapped around that, and their sense of worth can get wrapped around that as well.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, you allow crazy. A sport to do that, and it's not just here. I mean, you can see it. I mean, the Dallas Cowboys are it in Texas. They always were. They've been down a little bit, obviously, but yeah, I mean, I saw the same thing there with that. So it does happen. You do get caught up in things like that, and it was just like I know it sounds crazy. But Alabama football, as a very young kid, became my identity. It became my driving force. When Alabama won games, it made me feel really, really good, And I'll never forget, this is a crazy story. So I'm going to high school. I got a big high school. We have 650 in my graduating class. And a lot of people didn't know my name. There's some people didn't know my name, but they knew that's that Alabama guy, So my dream was for Alabama to win a national championship. I was in high school 75, 76, 77, 78. And, Alabama won the national championship the year I graduated, but it was actually, I graduated in the spring. They won it in the fall of 78. They won it again in 79. I'm standing in a hamburger shop one day. Guy comes walking in behind me, hadn't seen him since high school, and he's like, hey, Alabama, y'all just won another national championship. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, I thought this was supposed to feel like really special. Mm-hmm. And you remember things like that because it felt empty in a way. It didn't fulfill me like I thought it was going to fulfill me at that time. But I'll never forget that. It was a really odd feeling.
I want to talk about your journey because, I mean, you started out as an Alabama fan. You end up going to Alabama, but then you have this incredible journey, before you start Tighter Insider. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's always my goal to become a sportscaster. I really wanted to. I wanted to be either the voice of Alabama, or if not, certainly have some sort of a service or newsletter at that time. This is before the internet, that covered Alabama, specifically maybe focused in on recruiting. I was so obsessed with recruiting. I became really obsessed with that at a pretty young age, back in the 70s, mid-70s, when there wasn't information out there about recruiting. So it became a real goal of mine, a driving force. And so I went to, I finished up high school, had to go to a junior college, and I ended up going to Alabama in the fall of '82, which was Coach Bryant's last
year.
Yeah. So we did that. I did that and got out and got into sportscasting, was a sportscaster for a couple of years local. I moved to Jackson, Mississippi, where I worked there. And it just really wasn't what I thought it would be. I wanted to cover Alabama. I didn't care about covering, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, what have you. So anyway, I got out and went back to Texas. I got into eventually waste management. I worked for BFI, Browning Ferris, worked for them 10 years in sales and public relations, and had a really good run with them. Had a good career going with BFI, but it wasn't my passion. I always had this dream to cover Alabama, and it would never go away. And I just didn't see myself wanting to move up in the business there at waste management, in the waste management business. So with that said, I was trying to figure out ways to, what can we do? How can I do this? By this time, I get married in 1990. My wife had 2 young kids. Then we had our first child, a daughter, in 92. And all of a sudden, you're starting to push your mid-30s. And you've got a lot of responsibilities. And you've got this dream that seems like it's getting farther and farther away and more difficult to kind of envision it happening. And all of a sudden, one day, my oldest brother, he mentioned the internet. This was in 94. And I'm sitting here thinking, the internet? What is the internet?
Because originally you were thinking about maybe starting a magazine,
a
right?
newsletter or magazine. Yeah. And he said, look, newsletters and magazines, they're going out. He said, one day this internet, it's going to put newspapers and TV stations and everything out of business.
Yeah.
They're going to all be on the internet. And I'm like, he had a doctor's degree from Tulane. And I'm like, you've spent too much time in school. This box here is not going to take over newspapers. He said, no, this is where it's all going. He said, why don't you do this? Why don't you let me, by this time we'd moved on a year or so, and he 95, moved into 96, and he was like, why don't you just let me build you a website? And you can reach Alabama fans all over the world, and for basically no charge. See what happens. And I said, I was so desperate. Why don't we just try this? So we launched it in October of 96. And within 2 weeks, we're having 700 unique visitors a day.
And you're not charging at this point,
no,
right?
Charging. It was free.
Free. Okay. All right.
So I said, look, I'm working for BFI. I'm spending all this time, and I can't work my job and then also work all night long on TighterInsider.com. So let's make this a pay site. And my brother was kind of against that. He thought that advertising was the route to go. But I said, no, listen, Alabama fans, they crave information. And if they trust the source, they'll pay for it. And I said, if they don't, then I know that at least I gave it a shot, right? And so we started a pay site. We started as a pay site in December of 96, but roughly 2 months after we started. And within 18 months of starting it in December of 96, 18 months later, I was making more on TighterInsider.com from subscriptions than I was on my real job at BFI in sales and public relations that I'd been there for 10 years, had won a lot of sales awards, all of these things, having a successful run there. So I said, just one day, my wife in May of 98, she said, what do you think about putting the house up for sale and moving to Tuscaloosa and taking Tighter Insider full time? And I said, we can't do that. That's crazy. Look, there was me, my wife, and we just had our 4th child. Mm-hmm. She was only 5 months old. And my wife said, look, it's part of your business plan to move this to Tuscaloosa, right? And I said, yeah. And she said, it's your dream, right? I said, yeah. And she said, sometimes you just have to take a step of faith. And when she said that, I had this great sense of peace that came over me. I never forget this voice said, she's right. It's only life. And I'm thinking to myself, if it fails, I can always go back to selling dumpsters, And I said, put the house up for sale and let's do it. And we did. And man, we got here and it just blew up.
Why do you think Alabama fans are so interested in recruiting? Because it's one thing to just be interested in the program, but I think there's so many people that are just so locked in and dialed into that recruiting process. I've never, that hasn't been the top thing for me. I've always enjoyed, watching the games and going to games and things like that. But there are people that are just diehard, rabid recruiting. They follow that recruiting, as much as anything.
Yeah, I think it's really what it is, and I know what it was with me as an avid fan was I wanted to know, okay, Alabama's had all this success, right? Who's going to carry it on?
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to carry the torch? Who are these guys, and how good are they considered to be coming out of high school? So I wanted to know, hey, who's coming in? Who do we have? And actually, when I first started paying attention to that, there were two guys the first year, Tony Nathan and Jeff Rutledge, who, of course, obviously won a national championship, were part of national championship program. Their recruiting class in '75, they were the number one recruiting class in the country back in the day. I had a great recruiting year. That's when I started kind of paying attention to it. I was only 15 years old, but that's when it really grabbed my attention, and I wanted to know, hey, I got just so interested and excited to know who are the next wave, and I'll never forget reading about this guy, Major Ogilvy, out of Mountain Brook High School. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm reading his stats, and I'm like, what? 2,504 yards and 38 touchdowns in 1 year? You get excited about it, So it really kind of built from there. But I think it's just really people wanting to know that their team is going to continue to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, it's changed a lot over the years, though. I mean, you go from something that occurred in '75 or '77 to what it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got people that have got full blown events, and they're grabbing the hats, and they're on ESPN, and where does it go from here?
It's a big show. I really don't know I would have never thought it would. I never dreamed. I mean, this isn't something that really crossed my mind that one day a national network, ESPN, for example, would carry a day-long show dedicated to the signing of high school prospects, and they would go from town to town, of these top prospects and carry it live and some of the things that we've seen. So where does it go from here? That's a great question. I mean, I don't know. It's really interesting, but what has been very interesting in recent years is that we've gone from recruiting sites, networks, ESPN, all of these live announcements, till now these kids can make their own announcements live on Instagram, X, all the social media that's available, and just how that's changed. And now they're doing their own productions.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to your site for a minute. It's one thing to get it off the ground. It's another thing to maintain it across 30 years. What's been the biggest challenge for you in terms of maintaining your site?
Yeah, I think the real thing with me was that having the background in sportscasting and then in sales with BFI is I found that most people, if they trust you, then they're going to stick with you. And so that was really a thing was, I want to be trustworthy. I don't want to put out a bunch of hyped up headlines and different things and try to trick people and all of this. I didn't really have time for that, and in sales, you really want to, if you want to be successful, you've got to be a person of your word. I think you've got to have character and all of this. That was kind of the way I handled sales. And I think I carried it over, the things that I learned there. With BFI, I think I carried a lot of that over into how I manage TighterInsider.com. Mm-hmm. And if you're not going to get a prospect, I don't really want to lead my membership on to thinking, hey, we're going to get this guy, or I want to be as honest as I possibly can with the information that I have.
Is it true? I read your Bill Rice article, by the way, and is it true that you would actually, when you got started, you would call recruits? I mean, back in the day, you'd call them on the phone and talk to them about their process and their thought process about where they're going. And was that part of your process of getting it off the ground?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, that was something that I felt like at that time there was a real niche, especially with Alabama in the Alabama market, if you want to call it that, of covering recruiting. It was kind of empty there. People were covering it on a regional basis, Southeastern Conference, national basis. I said, hey, I'm just going to specify Alabama. That's my interest, and I'm going to focus in and give Alabama fans strictly information on, Alabama. So that really became a key target for me, was to calling prospects. That was an idea I had. What about firsthand interviews? And I think back in those days when I first started, you're talking about 30 years ago, you could get a lot of information when talking to a prospect, or you could get a lot of information talking to a high school coach, and you still can to some extent, or people around them. But now that's really changed.
Is it a little bit more closed off now?
Yeah,
than it
the
was?
kids
Yeah.
now, I mean, it's the same interview.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I read these interviews on network sites. I don't do those kind of interviews anymore. And the reason is that I call them cookie cutter interviews. I could have taken that same interview 30 years ago, and it's just the same interview.
Mm-hmm.
For example, when they do a lot of post-visit interviews, kids come in for official visits, and you read these interviews after they come in, and it's the same thing. Well, of course they enjoyed being there. Of course they were blown away by the facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Of course they loved the coaching staff. All of these things. That's not really something that's of interest, and I think so. Now what I like to do is I rely on sources that I've built up over the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here? What's the feel?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of keep fans abreast in that way of what I'm hearing from people that have information.
Mm-hmm. What does your day look like? What does your week look like? Well, take us inside, Monday to Friday.
Yeah.
What you're doing each day and each week as you're continuing to maintain and even build the site to even greater heights.
Yeah. Well, again, it depends on the time of the year. For now, it's really mostly recruiting. Talking to sources, doing articles, writing analysis of a commitment, what have you, trying to prepare the fans for what to expect next in recruiting. So that's really where we are now. As we move into fall camp, August camp, when they start to prepare for the season, we'll have a little bit of access where we can go observe practices for brief media viewing periods, talk to coaches, do interviews, all of those types of things, and I can relate what I see to the fandom out there. Just to give you an example, I never forget the first day of fall camp, 2011 season. I walked in and I looked around at this team that Nick Saban was preparing for the season. I walked out immediately and I said, I feel like I just walked out of an NFL training camp. And that team went on to win two straight national championships and almost won a third. I mean, it was amazing the talent that they had out there and just the job that they had done with those guys. So that's really, but once the season gets going, people say, I bet when the season gets going, it's hectic. Well, not really, because the schedule is more defined. You know what's happening every day of the week. Sunday's usually not a whole lot, maybe a little recap. Monday is you go to Coach DeBoer's press conference and you kind of give the feedback from that. And Tuesday you have some practice information that you can share. And Wednesday, by the time you get to Thursday, the week is done. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday is just kind of, you're preparing for the game.
How much travel is involved in your job?
Well, I mean, now it's just so different. I don't really do a lot of traveling anymore to games. I have people that help me during the season in terms of producing the game reports and all of these things. And the interviews come right to us. So I'm in the press box here on Saturdays, but I don't really have to travel to away games, and I have someone that helps me with that. So I don't do a lot of travel.
Yeah. Now, but you have done some writing, and
I've done, yeah.
and you've got a book out. The book is Bigger Than Bama: The Inside Story of Tider Insider. And tell us a little bit about how that got started.
Well, really, I never had any ambition to write a book, to be honest with you. And then I've told you about the story of how Tider Insider started and evolved to where it is, to got me to Tuscaloosa. Well, shortly after we got here in August of '98, things went extremely well. Like I said, it blew up. It exploded. The website, advertising on our website, started a TV show and that basically goes through the state. Now it's worldwide. I mean, because it's on the internet. But everything was just falling into place, and it was just blowing up. And I told you the story about my wife, uh, and the way she kind of supported me, and she encouraged the move to Tuscaloosa. She was always kind of the pillar of our home, the spiritual pillar of our home. She always believed that when I had this idea that this vision was going to come to fruition, even when I doubted, she was always the one that was pushing me into my destiny with her faith. And we got here, and it was pretty overwhelming. And when I say overwhelming, I was the only person covering the program with the internet presence at the time. Well, there may have been some others, but they weren't doing it like I was doing it. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about phone calls, high school coaches, high school prospects, the boosters that were calling, wanting information, sharing information, and all of a sudden, this thing becomes overwhelming.
And you're on the phone all the time.
All the time, nonstop. Tuscaloosa News wrote a story about the hectic pace of my lifestyle. And the girl started the story, the girl who authored the story, wrote the story. She said the phone is always ringing in Rodney Orr's home. And she gave a story about one night it was ringing so much I took the phone off the hook, and I left it off the hook for 2 hours. And at 1 a.m. when I put it back on, 5 minutes later it rang. That's true. It happened. That's kind of the way it was. I'd get calls at 1 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. Just nonstop. And hey, I got this story. I need to share it with you. If you want to get this out, we've got to get this out. So that's just kind of the way it was. Disrupted everything in my home. The bottom line was I lost contact with my wife. I lost contact with my kids. And our relationship, after a very short time, 2 years, was beginning to kind of, frankly, deteriorate, because all of my time was invested in what I was doing. And what I didn't understand or didn't know was that my wife was diagnosed as ADD, and they put her on a drug called Adderall. And what I didn't know was that the risk of addiction to a drug like Adderall and the probability of addiction is very high. And she got addicted to prescription drugs. And, the relationship that we had been deteriorating, as I mentioned. And I think that, together with the drugs, things just started going downhill rapidly. And in 2005, I put my wife into drug rehab. And she had to actually go to 2 drug rehabs. She walked out of the first one and put her in this second one, and I took her out. She got out right before Thanksgiving of 2005, and 16 months later, she passed away. And it was a horrific 16 months. Because a week after she got out of rehab, she got back on drugs. And it was hell on earth is the way to describe it. The last month of her life, she totaled 5 vehicles. And the night that she was killed on March 7, 2007, her accident occurred about 8:30 that night. 2 hours earlier, my son-in-law was killed in a separate accident. So we had double tragedy. He was killed at 6:30. She was killed in a separate accident at 8:30. And my daughter, Vanessa, she had lost her mother and her husband in the same night. My stepson, Brandon, who had been a 2-sport athlete at Alabama, he was facing 5 years in prison for drug trafficking. Our 14-year-old daughter at the time, Natalie, was smoking marijuana, drinking, and threatening suicide. Our youngest daughter, Madeline, at 9 years old, was asking me, "Dad, did Mom even love me?" And I'm dealing with hurt and pain of my own from a 6-7 year addiction, things that happened. It was chaos. It was total chaos. It was like, and I wrote this in my book because this is really the way it was. I remember standing in my kitchen one day, it's right after my wife had passed away, and it felt like an EF5 tornado had swept through our home, and there's debris everywhere. My kids, us, our family. It's like debris everywhere, and I'm like, this is a hopeless situation. How do we overcome this? And I never forget standing there. And, thankfully, I had a strong foundation from my youth with my mom in church, in faith. I remember just standing there and I said, Lord, I can't do this, but you can. And that's actually a title of one of the chapters in my book. And I tell people at that moment that as short time later, it's not that he changed our circumstances. It was more about he started changing me in a more significant way, and eventually the circumstances kind of worked out. And what I'm saying is that God gave me what to do when I needed to do it and how to do it. I was forced to become the person he designed me to be. Either that or I was going to lose my entire family, my kids, and I wasn't going to do that.
Is that when you became a Christian?
No, I grew up in a Christian home, and so I was gave my life to the Lord at a very early age, 9 years old. But now I was young, and I always had a heart for the Lord, but always, I guess sometimes maybe when you're young, you have a heart for the world too, right? I mean, you want to do what everybody else is doing. So yes, while it was, I felt deep down it was important to me, I still lived a life of kind of the world. And I think as I started having success with Tighter and Cider, it was more focused on my strength, what I could do, what I was doing, and it was, so that was really what I tried to teach my kids and those around me was, hey, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. But what I found out was, yeah, you might have success in the world, but guess what? Your whole family's falling apart. I mean, it's total chaos. And I'm like, wow. So it really gave me a perspective. I mean, they say God, family, God, then family, and then other things that you do. That is really the way it has to be. That has to be the pecking order. He is the foundation. And then, but, like I said, my wife was a spiritual pillar of our home, but that's not the way it was designed to be. The way it was designed to be, as the man of the home, I'm supposed to be the spiritual leader, and I wasn't that guy. Mm-hmm. I just wasn't that guy. And you know what? It didn't bother me that I wasn't that guy until I found out that, hey, you know what? This is what can happen.
I can relate to that so much because I was saved when I was 16, at First Baptist in Jasper. And then, man, I got off track for probably a decade after that and wasn't in church. I would say living a very carnal lifestyle. Yeah. And thankfully, by the grace of God, He has brought me back. But I think a lot of people, maybe they get saved or they call themselves a Christian, but what I've learned is dying to self. Yeah. That is such a huge part of the Christian life. And so would you say that would be the difference? When you started to really make a change, was that part of the equation was just dying to self?
Yeah, I really think one of the most significant things I ever did was 2 months after my wife passed away. I can't tell you what addiction does to a family, what it does to a person. And I'm not talking necessarily the person that is the addict. I'm talking about those around them. And it's so traumatic. And I think the best decision I ever made, I had so much hurt, so much pain, so much concern over my kids. I never forget standing there and I thought, I just got to sit down and journal. I got to sit down and write out my pain to the Lord. And I was sitting there, and that first day, I'll never forget. I would never forget it. I wrote for 3 hours. And I tell people, that's not about being good or anything like that. I was searching for God's presence, for His help. And in that moment, in that 3-hour period, He spoke to me. And I knew it was Him. And He revealed Himself to me in a very real way. And once that experience happened, and I knew He spoke to me, and He set me free in that very moment from something very specific as it related to my wife, and I knew it was Him, I said, you know what? I'm going to do this every single day. I've been journaling now for 18 years, every single day, every single morning. And I tell people, look, this isn't about good. I've got containers full of my journals. And some days I journal. Most days I journal at least for an hour or two.
Is this in the morning or evening?
Yeah,
or
just get up
whenever,
in the morning.
or-
I get up
okay.
if I can get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. There's times I hadn't been able to sleep at 3. I'll get up and go in there and stay from 3 to 6:30 in the morning, then go back to bed. I mean, it's whenever, but it's early. It's first, and I just sit down and I express myself. But it's not just me expressing myself. It's evolved into different things. Studying the Word, going in and now you can use the internet so effectively. You can go to AI and kind of get what is the meaning of this. You get a different perspective or a perspective that gives you some insight. But I use all of these tools to try to learn more, and it's helped me develop as a person. So what does it get down to? It gets down to one word. It's simple. It's relationship. It is true relationship, and knowing that He is real, that He will speak to you, and I think sometimes He speaks to people in ways they just don't recognize it. They just don't recognize it. It happened to me. There were different things that He spoke to me. I know I can see them now and I'll give you an example. We talked about kind of losing contact with my wife, and there was a point in time after we'd been here about 2 years, and she was starting to complain about our relationship and how it was kind of deteriorating. And she said, "Hey, you're going to take me out. You're going to take me somewhere nice to eat. You're going to spend some time with me." So we went to Outback over here on the corner of Skyland, and we sat down at the table to eat. And when we did, I looked at this woman sitting across from me, and we had been married, I don't know, a dozen years. And I'm going, I don't even know her. I don't know this woman. It was the most uncomfortable feeling I've ever had. Now, see, if I'd have been spiritually mature at the time, I would have said, hey, this is a warning sign. This is God speaking to me. And I would have addressed it right then. But at that moment, all I really wanted to do was, I was so uncomfortable, was get back to what? Work. Work.
You're knocking it out of the park at work.
Yeah.
You're struggling in your relationship with your wife, and so I think men tend to gravitate towards
Go back to work.
Sometimes.
I just want to get home to the computer.
Yeah.
And see, so it went gradually, step by step. It continued to go down.
What would you say to a man who is in that same situation right now? It could be a Christian or non-Christian, and what would you say to a man about how to treat his wife and about how to approach his relationship with his wife?
Well, first of all, let me say this, and I think as men sometimes we think we're in control. So there could be someone listening that would say, yeah, I'm in control of this relationship. That's what I thought. I thought I was in control. I didn't think our relationship she would ever leave or something would happen. No, I thought I was in total control. But here's the thing I learned. We're never in control. We're either giving control to God or we're giving control to the enemy. And if we're giving control to the enemy, we're deceived, right? I mean, if we think we're in control, we're giving control to the enemy and we're deceived. And that's really where He wants us to be. And I was deceived. So don't be deceived. You're never in control. Okay? And let me say this too. There's some people say, well, if something happened, big deal. No. You find out that your wife is more valuable to you and important when she's gone. If that makes sense. I mean, you don't really sometimes understand her value, how much you care, how important she is to you until she's gone. And that's really what I learned, and this was before she passed away. I realized, hey, I had this beautiful woman. She was everything I ever really wanted. And you know what? I didn't even recognize it.
But man, you own your shortcomings as a husband, as a stepfather, your shortcomings in your own family. You own it in this book. And I mean, was this a cathartic thing for you as well?
Yeah, I think it is. It definitely is. And just like journaling, I think it certainly is. This brought a lot of healing. But by the time I did this book, because I started writing in June of 2022, all of that had kind of already taken place. I think most of that. But so it was just a matter of people saying, hey, you need to get your story down. You need to get your story down, get it published. And it wasn't like that's something that I wanted to do in terms of do a book. I didn't mind telling my story. That wasn't it. But they said, hey, you need to do a book. So I wrote the book. And, again, it's like you said, I tried to be as open and honest as I could be.
Your stepdad to Brandon Avalos, who played quarterback at Alabama, and there were some difficult moments along the way with him, particularly with his little league career. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, Brandon was a really talented baseball player. He was really talented. In fact, when he came out of Hillcrest High School, one service had him rated one of the top 75 high school prospects in the country. And he was also being recruited for football, and the lure of Alabama football was something. He considered going to other schools, Nebraska, Virginia Tech, and some others at that time. But just the lure of playing at Alabama was really big, and it's hard on a local kid. Mm-hmm. It's really hard because people in the community, everyone knows him, and this and that and the other. So, but it was really hard on him, and but he got to Alabama, and he was redshirted as a freshman in football, and he was playing for Coach Fran. They started having all these coaching changes: Mike Price, Mike Shula, and he just lost contact. He was more involved or closer knit with baseball, mm-hmm. with Coach Jim Wells and the staff that they had. But he started dabbling in marijuana is what it started with, and prescription drugs. He had anxiety. But you talked about the little league aspect of it, and that's a really good story because Brandon had a really good run in little league. But when he got to Hillcrest High School, I never forget, it was his sophomore year, and they had a big tournament over in Mississippi. I think it was a Starkville Invitational was what it was called. And it had like a lot of the top high school players, junior college players from across the Southeast. And there were going to be a lot of pro scouts there to observe this event. And we were actually on vacation that week out of town in Texas. And Brandon went over to play in this tournament for post ball, and he had this magnificent tournament. He went 10 for 16, had a home run, several stolen bases, a lot of multiple base hits, all of those things just really stood out. But he called one night, and he would call every night and check in. And one night when he called to check in, of course I was anxious. All I wanted to do is talk to him about how did you do in the game. See, that's what our relationship was built on. How do you perform in athletics? It wasn't about anything else for me. And I hate to say that. I hate to admit that. My goal with him was to help him to become a Major League Baseball player. That was really, and I pushed him really hard to do that.
Was that your dream that you put on him?
I think it is, yeah. I think that was because it was so strong with me growing up and all of that. Play quarterback at Alabama.
So that's what you wanted to do, right?
Yeah,
you wanted to grow up and be
in a
professional athlete.
Exactly. Okay. And I think it was kind of living vicariously through him in a way. And I saw he had the talent to become a Major League Baseball player. And then when Jim Wells tells you this kid's ultra gifted, I could see him in 3 years potentially being a draft pick and moving on. He said he's got that kind of talent. So when Jim Wells says that, that kind of stokes the fire a little bit. But when he was in high school, he had this tournament in Starkville, and he called this particular night to check in with us when we were in Corpus Christi. And he starts telling me about his game. He went 3 for 5 that game. And I said, well, let me ask you. He had a triple, a couple doubles, drove in some runs. And I was like, did you strike out the last 2 times you were at bat? And he said, yeah, how did you know that? I said, you struck out on curveballs, didn't you? And he said, yeah. And I said, when are you going to learn how to hit a curveball? And he was like, well, what do you mean? I said, they found you out. Mm-hmm. See, you got some big hits on fastballs, but now they found you out. So when are you going to learn to hit a curveball? And that was kind of a harsh tone. And he's like, wow, can I ever just have a good game? And I'm like, Brandon, do you want to be good or do you want to be great? And I just remember he sighed. And that was a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure on a kid. But I have to admit, That's just one example. This was constant. It was, I was pushing him as hard as I could push him to become that guy. And as Ray Millick helped me word it in the book, it blew up on us.
What do you think was going on within you that caused you to act like that toward him? I'm not trying to beat you up. I'm asking you.
No.
I know these are hard questions, but
No. Listen, here it is. So maybe people can relate to this. Men can relate to us. I was having a lot of success, and I attributed my success to grinding, to being relentless.
Self-made.
Self-made, like I said earlier, self-made. I was trying to do everything in my strength.
I did this.
My strength,
Right.
And I felt like that I had this pressure to do it and to perform and to make this happen. And I wanted it to happen. It was my goal. It was my dreams. It was my ambition. So everything was poured into that. And I was trying to show him, hey, this is your goal. This is your dream. This is your ambition. You've got the talent to be a Major League Baseball player, and you've got the ability. This is what you have to do. And I would drive him and drive him and drive him, and just doing things that were just out of the ordinary to kind of push him to where I thought he could be the athlete that he could become. And I'll tell you this. I told the 3 for 5 story. I've had a lot of speaking engagements, and at Hale County High School, I know the principal down there. And he called me one day and he's like, hey, Rodney, I'd really like for you to come share with our parents of our athletes. And so I spoke to all the parents of the athletes there at Hale County High School one night, and I told the 3 for 5 story. So a couple of years later, 2 or 3 years later, this guy's walking through Winn-Dixie down there in South Tuscaloosa, and he's like, hey, you remember me? And I'm like, no, I don't. And he's like, well, I was there at Hale County. I'm a parent. You told the 3 for 5 story. And I said, yeah. He said, I just want to tell you, man, you were describing me. He said, I've always been the loudest parent at the ballpark. And he said, man, that story you told struck me. And I said, hey, I got to back off. And he said, I just want you to know, I'll never forget, he went just like this. He goes, me and my son we're like this. And he said, I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to hear that story.
I've got a 6-year-old, and we play everything: baseball, basketball, flag football. And the challenge for me is to kind of strike that balance, because you do want to challenge them, and you don't want to be too soft, and that everything's applause, garners applause. But at the same time, you got to take that pressure off, man. I liken it to like you're just kind of unscrewing that 20-ounce Coke. You just take the pressure off a little bit, and not put so much pressure on them to perform, because it, coming from somebody, and I really think that my dad's behavior towards me and just the way he acted after ball games and the amount of pressure that he put on me, I think it really negatively impacted my athletic career, and I don't want to put that on my son. So that's the challenge for me, is how do I strike that balance?
Yeah. I think when you cross the line when nothing's good enough. I mean, when a kid goes 3 for 5 and, has the kind of tournament that, for example, Brandon had, when the first thing you do is pick out every little flaw. Again, I understand the importance of developing and getting better and encouraging in a positive way. That is all important. But when you get to the point where nothing is ever good enough, and that's where I was, nothing was ever good enough. Anything short of perfection was not good enough.
And that's going to impact them and their relationship with their wives, their relationship with other people. I mean, the way we're shaping them, and this is what I don't understand. I don't understand. There's men out there that they don't hug their sons. They don't tell their sons they're proud of them. They don't tell their sons they love them.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot fathom that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm with you on that. And, I think Brandon really understood that how much I cared for him and all of that. But that matters. But when you are so focused on creating this athlete that it overrides everything else. You follow me? In other words, all this scrutiny, all the pressure, I mean, that's what they feel. That's what they feel. You take for granted that they should understand that you love them, but they don't. I mean, they see how what they see is
he knows
what you
he
do.
knows I love him.
Yeah, what they see is what you do.
Yeah, sure.
And you know, I look, my grandson. I have a grandson. Well, I have 14 grandkids. I got 15 on the number 15 on the way. Just a newborn here last week, grandson. But I have a 5-year-old grandson that played a coach pitch this year, and I'm just amazed at some of the things I saw. In terms, I mean, this is a 5- and 6-year-old kids out there, and some of the responses from some of the dads that I'm like, first of all, we have to be realistic, right? Your son is probably not going to be a Major League Baseball player. That's not very likely. So what are you really doing to him?
It's like a circus out there.
Yeah.
You know, let's shift gears for a minute, and I want to ask you, what is the most interesting or compelling Alabama story? I mean, because look, let's face it, it's never boring.
Yeah, it's never
I mean,
boring.
like that's if you're a Bama fan, like you're never bored.
Yeah.
So for you, over
Yeah.
30 years, what's been the most interesting or compelling story?
Well, listen, and this is part of my book. This is what I wanted to get across in my book. Was back in 2005, 6, 7, I was living the worst nightmare of my life. Mike Shula was the coach at Alabama at the time. And then all of a sudden we move into 2006 and my wife is taking a nosedive. She's starting to go straight down by this time, right? And Shula gets fired. And I'm sitting here trying to deal with this situation I have with a wife that's on drugs, that's lost her mind, that's going crazy, that's wrecking cars left and right. My kids are in an uproar. My whole family's in chaos. And I'm covering this story. Mike Shula just got fired. Who's going to be the next coach at Alabama? And all of a sudden, you know, people are telling me, and this is actually before Shula ever got fired, people were already telling me, sources, that Nick Saban was interested in the job. So I'm covering the greatest story of my career, the hiring process of Nick Saban, and also dealing with the worst tragedy, nightmare of my life, my wife's addiction, all at the same time. And I tell a story in the book that in early December of 2006, I can tell you the date, it was Thursday, December the 7th, word came that the next day, Rich Rodriguez, who was the head coach at West Virginia at the time, was going to tell his West Virginia team on Friday, the next day, he was going to become the head coach at Alabama. So that night, I get a phone call that evening from Memphis. And it was from the office of a renowned sports agent, Jimmy Sexton, who Jimmy Sexton represents who? Nick Saban. So the guy on the other end said, "Hey, Rodney, I want you to know that we're watching your website. I think you've got a lot of information. I can tell you've got some information that you haven't shared, but based on some things you posted, reading between the lines." He said, "So I'm going to help you out." He said, "Did you know Alabama's about to make the biggest mistake in college football history?" And I said, "By hiring Rodriguez?" He said, "No, by not waiting on Nick." He said, "Nick wants the job." And he said, and Alabama's about to hire Rodriguez when they could have Nick Saban. And he said, "But let me tell you this." He said, "If something happens that Rodriguez falls through, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen, but if he does fall through," he said, "Nick still wants the job. He doesn't care if he looks like he's the second choice. He wants the Alabama job." I said, "Wow, you know, I'm feeling really bad about this because I'm thinking, man, you can have Nick Saban, a national championship coach. It's not that Rodriguez was a bad coach, but Nick Saban, you know." So he said, "I'll keep you abreast on this." And so we get off the phone, and within an hour, my wife comes storming in out of control on drugs, and I have to call the sheriff's department to come haul her away, right? So again, I'm dealing with this story, and I'm dealing with this addiction
sensory overload
on the same
Yeah.
night. So people say, how did you really manage that? And I said, I had to learn to compartmentalize my thoughts. I developed the ability to, no matter what was going on around me, to block everything out but what I needed to focus on. And if it was the story, the following the coaching search, or if it was dealing with my wife, that's what I did. And I would block everything else out and focus on that. So, but here's the thing to that story. The next day, when Rodriguez was supposed to tell his team at 2:30 that afternoon he was going to Alabama, I get a phone call that morning from the Jimmy Sexton's office again. This is about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he's like, "What are you seeing out there?" I said, "Well, ESPN's reporting that Rodriguez is going to be the next coach at Alabama. He's going to tell his team at 2:30. I said, "Now AL.com, all the local papers are reporting the same." He said, "I've got great news for you." And I'm like, what could be great, in this? And he's like, "Rodriguez isn't coming. He's staying at West Virginia." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I want you to go out on your website, and I want you just post that your sources are telling you Rich Rodriguez is staying at West Virginia." And I told him, I said, "Now look, if I do this, and first of all, it's going to create an uproar. And if Rodriguez comes, I'm going to look really bad about 2:30 this afternoon." He said, "Trust me." So I did it. And I got a lot of negative feedback, initially. 30 to 45 minutes after I posted that, ESPN comes out with a report that sources in Morgantown, West Virginia are telling us that they are growing confident Rich Rodriguez will remain their head coach. And I'm like, wow, this guy's, he's been a real important source for me in this deal. And Rodriguez stayed. And I told people, I said, my guy told me, he said, "Look, everything's going to go quiet. Feel free to tell your readers that you believe Nick Saban will be the next head coach." He said, "Because unless Alabama screws this up, Nick Saban will be the next coach at Alabama."
And that's probably the biggest turn of events that has happened in possibly in the entire Alabama football history.
Oh, it's incredible. It was just incredible. And I didn't hear from this source through that 3.5 week time till Saban finished up his season at Miami and, was named the head coach. But, you saw it, the airport, the way the fans turned out to greet him here. It was just amazing. It was almost like you knew something big was coming, but you didn't know it was going to be as big as it was.
Well, and he exceeded expectations. As high a threshold as Alabama fans hold for the program, he blew it out of the water.
He blew it out of the water. It was really amazing, man. But here's the thing about it too, and I mentioned this to people. It's almost really like it was just a 2-hour movie.
17 years went by
like that. It was like a 2-hour movie.
Yeah.
It was like, man, this is crazy.
Yeah. And it's over.
It's over.
Yeah.
It's over. He just flew in the other day, and now we've won 6 national championships and all of this stuff, and now he's gone.
I think Alabama's still really, really affected by it.
Yeah.
It was shocking that he stepped away when he did. I actually went to the game out in Pasadena, and I walked out of that stadium thinking, I cannot believe we just lost. I was in shock.
Yeah.
And then just a few days later, I was in even more shock that he stepped away, and I think I don't know that Alabama has recovered. Fans have recovered since then.
Yeah, it's a lot like Coach Bryant. I'm sure you experienced that. I know that I did. I was in school here when Coach Bryant stepped down, and even then, when you knew that he wasn't looking like he was in the best of health, Coach Bryant, you just thought he was going to be here forever. He's not stepping down. So it's the same thing, and it may have even been worse then, to be honest with you. Because Coach Bryant played at Alabama, he was Alabama, and again, Nick Saban is certainly Alabama as well. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, in those days, it was just so different because you didn't have social media, you didn't have the nationwide, worldwide, really scrutiny and the availability, the accessibility to information, right? And so he was just such a legend at that time, and so it's very similar.
I would be very surprised if Alabama went 13 years without winning a national championship, like they did from '79 to '92. I would be very surprised because I mean Saban has elevated the program to unprecedented heights. And I just think that he's built it up such that another national championship is coming, I think, pretty soon.
Well, I think, listen, a lot of people ask me about Kalen DeBoer. He led Washington. He took them over. They were 4-8 the year before. They went 25-3 in 2 years. And in the second year, they played for the national championship. He is definitely a national championship coach. He knows how to get a staff together, organize a staff, manage a program, build a program, recruit, all of these things. The question is fit. Because this program here, they judge what you wear on the sideline, how you say something, everything you do everything's scrutinized. I think he can be extremely successful. I personally agree with you. I think he could win national championships here. It's a lot different now with the playoffs. It's going to be more and more difficult, I think. But yes, I do think he is a national championship coach.
All right, we got to wrap up. So tell us about how somebody subscribes to Tighter Insider and what you get with the membership.
Yeah, well, TighterInsider.com, it's only $48 a year. We've been $48 since like 2004. So
no inflation here.
Yeah,
So
$48 a year, and it gives you, like, we're doing tons of recruiting stuff right now, coverage of the team, but we have a community of Alabama fans. Now, let me tell you, somebody did a demographic of the Tighter Insider board, and they said that it's highly educated professionals, right? You would be surprised how highly educated professionals can act and react during a football game. But we have a great community of Alabama fans there. Game day's crazy, post-game in our community. Listen, there's a ton of exchange. There's a lot of really good information you can pick up and insight. So it's only $48 a year.
That's awesome, man. Well, listen, I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
Loved hearing your story, certainly about your faith, and we really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.